Hello, everyone. It's Laurie and Jennie again of AstroPath. And we're here today to talk about the lunar eclipse. But before we get to that, please like our video, subscribe to us, do all those good things, leave comments if you like what we're doing here. Also, Jennie is of Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathAstrology.com. She does a lot of good stuff over there, so check it out, get on her mailing list, and you can find me at lauriefarrington.com and on a lot of other things. You can find all that information in the show notes. I'm not going to bore you with all of that at this point. We're going to get right into what we're here to talk about. You want to talk about the cycles, Jennie?
Yeah, so we are going to talk about the Taurus full moon and lunar eclipse that's happening on October 28th, and I believe it's at 4:24 p.m. That day, Eastern time, so adjust for your time zone as usual. So yeah, we are at an eclipse. We're at the final eclipse of the whole Taurus Scorpio thing that's been going on since November 2021. So just, put that in your mind there about to give you a time frame. But essentially, we're at a full moon, right? So that means that 2 weeks ago, we had a new moon that kicked off the cycle. Here we are at the full moon where we're going to get to see, that big, bold full moon in the sky, depending where you live. And then in 2 more weeks, the whole cycle is going to change and start again. So that's, really we're smack dab in the middle of the lunar cycle. And that's always where we are, the full moon. So in this case, before we talk more about the eclipse and all that stuff, let's just revisit. We had a solar eclipse on October 14th, which is the new moon in Libra that is kicking off this cycle. So now here on October 28th, we're at the full moon. If you like to use the longer annual cycle, which is also helpful, then on May 18th, we had a Taurus new moon, which also kicked off this much longer cycle. The other thing I mentioned, just in case you got a little confused there, is just that this is part of a longer eclipse series that has gone on since November 19th of 2021. So there's a lot of different timeframes to think about. And we will get more into explaining that as we explain the eclipses, but just get those dates in your mind. And so, yeah, let's just carry on. So, Laurie, what do you think about this lunar eclipse?
What do I think about this lunar eclipse? That seems like a trick question. Well, I think the thing that's really interesting about it is that we've all been talking about how the nodal axis moved and is now in Aries and Libra rather than Scorpio and Taurus, where it's been for the past 18 months approximately. So it's kind of interesting because as we talk about the nodes moving into Aries and Libra, one of the things we say is that for the next 18 months, that's where the eclipses will be. But then here we are with an eclipse back in Taurus. So that can be a little confusing, but the nodal axis is in Aries and Libra, and this little eclipse right here is in Taurus, really wrapping up. The way I think of it is it's wrapping up the eclipse cycle that was in Taurus and Scorpio over the last 18 months. So what we're really doing at this full moon is wrapping up an 18-month story. We're ending something. I think of, full moons, I always think of as celebrations. So this is sort of a celebration of the work that we've done for the last 18 months. It's a time to really pay attention and look at what has changed in the area of your life, that the house that holds Taurus. What's changed in this past 18 months? And kind of celebrating that, acknowledging it, and then we're moving forward. We will not have any more eclipses for another 18 years or so. We won't have any more eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's going to be a big shift in a lot of ways for all of us. And it is kind of I like that you brought up, the the nodal axis is in Aries and Libra at this point. And so this is kind of the handing of the baton, the closing down of the chapter that Taurus and Scorpio represents in your personal life, and handing that baton off to the Aries and Libra chapter. What's interesting about both those things, Taurus, Scorpio, Aries, Libra, they're very much about our relationships. I mean, they're about other things too, but really our relationships, how we handle topics like stability and depth, in our relationships. And then it will move to a more, almost kind of like a more stark version of that when you get to Aries and Libra. And we'll talk more about those shifts later on as we make more videos. But for now, let's focus on the Taurus and Scorpio. We are in Scorpio season. We've made a video about that, so please check that out. But Scorpio is all about having to come to terms with the deep emotional content that is underlying all of our existence, basically. I mean, it really is getting down into those harder to see and understand places, so there's some topics here that are about, just coming to terms with what that Scorpio represents for you, and like, noticing places where you might feel wounded or resentful, or on the other hand, you might feel really empowered and enlivened and very much like you want to take action on things. So we are in that Scorpio season, and then the Taurus lunar eclipse brings in the polarity. What does Taurus represent against the backdrop of Scorpio? And, Taurus is an earth sign against Scorpio's water, so Taurus wants to have some groundedness and some stability, and it wants to keep things how they are. And it wants to really focus on practical, tangible, tactile things, versus Scorpio's like, hey, let's just be in the deep emotions. So it's a interesting polarity. A lot of different things in there about, both signs have some desire to control or possess. So there's an element of having to understand, what do we need to keep right now? What do we need to let go of? What things do we think that we need to keep that we actually need to let go of? And then what things do we really need to hold in our minds that will help us stay stable through all of the tumultuousness that's going on right now? So, yeah.
I think that's such an important piece, is really at this full moon, paying attention to where we have stability in this incredibly unstable environment of the world in the year 2023. There is so much instability everywhere we look, and yet we need to find that key, that peace within ourselves, where no matter what is going on around us, we can hold on to a piece of internal stability.
Yeah. I think one question, I was doing a little research for this, and one question that came up was like, looking at like, what makes life worth living? Those are Taurus Scorpio things. Like Scorpio brings you to that stark, almost survival mode. Like what is the thing, what's the difference between being alive and not being alive? This very fine line that it can be at times. So real survivalist type of behavior, whereas Taurus brings in, worth and value, and like what makes things worth what, so a worthy question about what makes your life worth living. Like, how does this polarity play out in your individual chart that brings those topics up?
Yeah, these are both fixed signs. And like you said, they both bring in some sort of like power and control, and yeah, they're wanting to hold on to things in a certain way, or control things, or if not control them, destroy them. There's that.
Yeah.
It's definitely these are very, very powerful areas of our lives that are being highlighted. Okay,
I think so. Yeah, do you want to look at the chart?
Yeah, let's take a look at the chart. Let's see. I hope I've got it right here. Yes, I do. Here we go.
That you do. Oh yeah,
There
look
we
at that.
have it.
Nice. Yeah, so you can see right away, this is really, really highlighting. We talked a little bit about this polarity in the Scorpio season video because it's so prominent, not beyond just this lunar eclipse. We've got 3 planets in Scorpio for most of the season. And then we have Jupiter and Uranus both making their way through Taurus. And then the moon is kind of saying its hello through these couple days, at the lunar eclipse and a couple days after. So it's really bringing this up. The the thing, it's funny, you think about Taurus and you're like, oh, stability. However, we've had Uranus moving through Taurus for a while now. So, since 2018. And I just think that there's some way in which there's been some tumultuousness in some part of your life, like that we like to be stable. So this really kind of highlights the idea of like honing in on what does stability really mean to you with so much instability? What does it mean to be stable? And we're talking about an internal process here with Scorpio, like the internal ability to feel stable at times of major upheaval.
Yeah, it's so interesting just thinking about Uranus going through Taurus. When did it move in there again? You just said 2007?
I think it was 2018.
2018. Yeah, I should have that right on the top of my tongue. But at any rate, Uranus's time in Taurus has been so incredible in terms of, you think about Taurus. Taurus is about the earth. It's about grounded stability. And yeah, look around, all of the shifts and changes, all the ways in which we thought the earth was stable seem to not be holding that stability. So yeah, that's really, really highlighting this period. We would normally think of Taurus as just so stable, but it's just been in so much upheaval.
Yeah, and it's Uranus is the great awakener. So it is trying to wake us all up to this question. I think when you boil it down to this question of what is stability to you, what does it mean? And Scorpio brings in that whole, because we're in Scorpio season, just that whole moment of existence. I mean, I was thinking back to reading Stephen Forrest's book about the signs, and he very much talks about Scorpio as, being in the desert, running out of water, and having a scorpion sitting on your chest. And what that does to your psychology, where, I mean, besides being awful and like scary and all the things, but the idea that it really gets you to focus in on that exact present moment. And I think that that's what a lot of this lesson is with the Taurus stuff is, you really only have that moment of agency. There is this, this one living moment, and it's the now, and it really kind of brings you into that and forces you to kind of unearth what is the stability that's available in that single moment, and being a lunar eclipse, it really is saying, and revisit that question at this lunar eclipse,
I love that. It's one of the great gifts that Stephen Forrest has is, painting these pictures, these little stories that stay with us. And I always remember that with Scorpio. Yeah, if there's a scorpion sitting on your chest, you open your eyes and see it there. You don't worry about the future. You don't worry about the past. You are right there in that moment. And in that moment, if there's not a scorpion sitting on your chest, in that moment, you find some little stability that you can hang on to.
Yeah. I think the other the other piece that comes in here just on a personal level for everybody is that there's also some way in which Taurus can kind of want things to stay the same, and it tries to cling on and keep things the same way, and it might try to avoid the emotional realities of things. But during Scorpio season, it's like you have to consider your emotional life, as well, like what's going on in your emotional life as part of your practical life. Like they go together, and that's what these polarities show you. And it's very easy to kind of try to just exist in one end of the polarity versus another. And that's not, ultimately you are looking at both and working with both ends, and these eclipses really kind of give you opportunity to really see that, and it comes up to you in a really apparent way.
It's really interesting. That's really interesting. Another thing that we often think about, Jennie, and we didn't really talk about it when we met before starting the video, but one thing that we often talk about, and I don't know if we need to necessarily, but just the path of the moon since the conjunction 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good conversation. Yep.
Yeah. What would you see as important in that pathway? Because clearly, since the conjunction, the moon has gone over, probably Mercury wasn't there. My cat is climbing the tree of the, oh God. So the moon went over Mars, it went over Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, and now here it is in the opposition.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of this idea of, I think I learned this from you, that idea that the moon kind of, it's absorbing. So it picks up and carries all of these significations. And having gone over, I mean, Scorpio to Taurus in this manner is funny. It's kind of, you're going through a lot of not as personal planets, signs. Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, those are all big, you're getting kind of, the picture's getting bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden you're back to Aries and your sphere drops right back down to you know? Yeah. So it is, I keep seeing these themes, and we keep talking about this of, these big shifts happening in the culture. And then how do you work with that in your personal life? How does that big picture get incorporated into your life? Like, we're all connected in this global world. We know what's going on in these other parts of the world where there's war and there's, and they're all connected. We're all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like it's a statement of that. Like, you can try to put your head in the sand, but it's not helpful, but it's also just not authentic. I mean, this is what's happening in our world, and we all have to kind of struggle with it.
And on that emotional level, it first picked up Mars and then Pluto. I mean, think about that. Mars and Pluto have been in that square aspect here during this time. And we have certainly picked up this intense, deep, horrifying emotion from what we're seeing going on in the world. And to me, I think of that, and then it goes through Saturn and Neptune, and it's like, okay, that brings into even more clarity just that need to find that stability in the moment. Mm-hmm. Because it's not necessarily, we can't count on it outside of a present moment.
Yeah, exactly.
That might sound very negative, but I don't know.
Well, no, I think, I do think there's a realism to this. Taurus is concrete, it's earth, and it's having Uranus go through Taurus for all this time, as we talked about a few minutes ago, it is very much a symbol for having to wake up to the stability is not what it once was. So it's not what we thought it was before. And there is a wake up going on in our culture. And I know there's a lot of resistance to that wake up when you see how it's sort of how it's being made fun of and so on and so forth. But it doesn't matter if you make fun of it or not. The reality is there is a wake up call going on. And I think part of what that wake up call is the connection. I mean, having Taurus to me represents the planet on a big scale, and there's a lot of disruption going on a planetary level, both in humans and in the climate. And just, you don't need to rely on other sources for that. Just look around you, pay attention to what's going on in your local environment, and you can see those things mirrored and magnified in your own local climate. So hopefully what Laurie and I are doing here is just kind of bringing this to you, that you do need to kind of work with these symbols yourself and have, and really ask yourself that question is, what does it mean to have inner stability for yourself? So anything else you want to talk about this chart?
I'm having a hard time. My cat is distracting me. I apologize to everyone. It's just, I don't want to have to lock him in the other room, but I might have to. I think I think we've talked about this enough. I think we can go right on into the individual impacts. Are you ready to do that?
Yeah, and we will make one more video at the Scorpio new moon, so there'll be more information on that. But I think we're ready to jump into individual impacts.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go. And I'm going to let you, I know what I have to do. I have to stop that. In order to, they changed the annotation tools here, and it's leaving me a bit confused. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So with Aries rising, this whole lunar eclipse business that we've been going on about at length is falling in your second house. That means that for those of you with Aries rising, for the last couple of years, almost since November 2021, there's been some sort of shift or process or change in the way you value yourself. This can have to do with your financial resources. This can have to do with just your personal resources, like the value that you add to each and every situation that you're part of. And it always always has to do with something about your self-esteem or self-worth. That's where there's been some kind of big change in the story, so think to yourself, Aries rising, what is that story? What is going on in my life that has to do with those topics, so that you know what we're referring to here. And then ask yourself, what are you ready to bring to a close? I mean, there's a closing down here within a lunar eclipse. So what would you like to bring a close to in this area of your life that feels important at this time? And what does it mean? Again, ask yourself that question we talked about before in the longer section here. Just like, what does it mean to be stable? What does stability mean to you? Like, probably your view has changed on what that is. So that's really what you want to get at during the Taurus lunar eclipse.
Right. Yep. It's interesting. I'm thinking as you're talking about it, it's like your sense of what you need in terms of your self-worth. What do you need? I think of this so much around finances. Your perspective has changed. We can think about the change occurring as the nodes have been in that area. Your attitudes around money and resources. It might not be that the actual dollar figure in your bank account or in your paycheck has changed. That may not have changed at all, but your attitude and what you believe you need may have changed quite dramatically over this period of time. And this is sort of closing down a change that has happened in that area. I suspect that there's probably some of you listening to this who've really kind of embraced a more minimalistic attitude toward what you need, rather than feeling like, you need $1 million in a savings account to feel safe. So there's something in that you want to really, at this full moon, celebrate the change that has happened, whatever it is. There's been a change around your attitude toward money and resources and your self-worth, and really celebrating the change that's happened.
Yeah. And just, this is a polarity. So the other thing you want to remember is, like, we're in Scorpio season. So what is coming to you that is challenging or forcing you or helping you to see, to get clear about how your values have changed? And it's often like someone outside of yourself, the way somebody else is handling their money, the way somebody else puts their values out into the world. That's what the Sun and Scorpio is representing here, like the challenge that's coming to you. And what it does is it allows you to see more deeply inside yourself and understand more of yourself, like in what you're doing. So if you're struggling with somebody, if there's somebody's values or the way somebody spends their money or whatever that triggers you, it's kind of great, because it's just giving you information about what you need to, adjust to feel more stable in your own realm of how you value yourself. I mean, that is essentially what it's doing. And please do listen to the Scorpio season video for more information about what that's hitting you, how that's hitting you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we talked about was having a talisman with you at this time of this full moon, to really remind you of what you've accomplished, what this last 18 months has taught you around your self-worth, around your financial situation. What kind of a talisman would you recommend that people put in their pocket?
I know it's kind of it's interesting, is it's Taurus, so you definitely want it to be something that you can hold. And I mean, what came to my mind is kind of weird, but I was thinking about something that represents your connection to your money. So like, I was thinking about like a little money clip, like, it's kind of stupid, but just the idea that, like, there's something you can tangibly touch that helps you remember, oh yeah, this is how far I've come. That's the idea here. And really, in the second house, that talisman, it's something that is of worth to you, something that represents worth and value. So I mean, it could be a little trinket that you have, or a piece of jewelry that you don't wear, but you value, that you're like, oh, like, so that's kind of the idea. It could be
$100 bill.
That's true.
You know, it's funny. I had a prosperity teacher many years ago, long story, but I had a prosperity teacher who her whole idea was you get $100 bill, you put it in your pocket, you never touch it. No matter how your situation is, keep that there and you will feel, you'll feel wealthy even if you can't pay your bills.
Yeah.
I don't know how wise an idea that is, but having something solid to hold on to really represent the change within you around your money, resources, and self-worth. Bottom line, find something that represents that, whether it be $100 bill or a trinket of some sort that means something to you, that has value.
I think what popped in my head too, as realizing where that trinket idea came from for me, is that I got this little gold coin from my grandmother, and there it is. And like something like that in your life that can link you to the bigger picture of worth and value and so on. So any of those ideas, and if you've got something else, tell us what you do. So
but some sort of a talisman, and right. Give us a note. Tell us what you used. Okay, let's move on to folks with Taurus rising. So this is so personal for you. This is occurring, the full moon itself is occurring right in your first house. The first house is, it's the most personal house. It's the most personal area of the chart. It is your personality. It's how you show up, how you express yourself in the world. This is an area where there's been a lot of change and possibly upheaval, possibly excitement over the last 18 months. While the nodes have been in those two houses, there's just been a lot of upheaval and change in this area. So you want to really think about how you've changed, how you have changed your expression, how you put yourself out in the world. And with the Scorpio season, there's some way in which you need that mirror of others, of partners or close friends, romantic partners, business partners. You need those relationships to kind of reflect to you what the change is that has gone on for you.
Yeah, and I think, with Taurus rising too, it's like, I don't know, there's a key question about like, what does stability mean to you? I mean, we've kind of said that universally, but especially with Taurus rising, I mean, anybody with Taurus rising, there's a way in which you put your values out into the world all the time. You kind of walk around with them and carry them around. And it's the image people get of you when you walk in the room, like somebody who's either carrying something of worth or has something of worth to offer, or has a set of values that are very strongly received and seen. So there's something about all of those. And that really is the key question, is like, maybe you thought stability meant one thing 2 years ago, and now you're kind of moving to this new place where you've kind of shed some of those maybe more materialistic behaviors, and you're kind of honing in on something more internal that is providing the stability, and I think too, anyone with Taurus rising is like, you need to have a connection to animals or nature or something, because that's where you get a real source of grounding on a larger level. And maybe that's what's changed. Maybe you're getting outside more and seeing that bigger connection. Not really sure, but certainly, as Laurie's saying, like the Scorpio piece from the other end of it is just holding up a mirror to you. Your partner is holding a mirror for you to understand more about your own worth. And maybe the tumultuousness has happened in your partnerships. Probably there's at least a little bit of that. But hopefully it's a way in which you've been able to wake up to a little bit more of the truth of who you are, because Uranus has also been moving through Taurus. So, wow, a lot of change in Taurus. And this really is a massive shift for anybody with Taurus rising. Yeah. And, Laurie and I have been talking about like, what kind of talisman could you have in your pocket that can help you remember what is the change you've been through? And I mean, my go-to here is just like a treasured stone, like a little rock that is a piece of Mother Nature that you have in your pocket that you can just remind yourself, oh yeah, I've done a lot. I've accomplished a lot. I'm a different person now. I mean, there's many other things you could choose, but to me, that's like the most simple, But do you have any ideas, Laurie?
Yeah, a little mirror.
That's a good
You
one.
know, I mean, this is how you show up. Yeah, that's what came to my mind is have a, you know, one of those little compact mirrors that our mothers used to carry, or my mother used to carry when I was little. She always had a little compact mirror somewhere. I think I have a few somewhere. But yet something that you can, that really represents to you the change in your expression, how much you've changed, and to really celebrate that change, and to find the stability, the core within that, within how you show up, even in the midst of all that change, you know, no matter how much, no matter how much change Uranus brings to Taurus, it's still Taurus. It's still, there's still that core, that kernel of value and stability in there. And it's really important as you kind of release this cycle, release this focus in that area, and kind of hold on to the awareness of how much change there is there, to really acknowledge as well your own inner stability.
And the other, all through Scorpio season, let your relationships mirror back to you, because that's what's really the key during the season. So
yeah, so be sure, if you haven't already, listen to the Scorpio season video that we made, and leave us a note below. Tell us what you're using for a talisman. I really encourage you to do that. With Taurus, it's like something tangible to hold on to, really is helpful. So leave us a note, let us know.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, let's move on to folks with Gemini rising.
So with Gemini rising, there's a reference here to some kind of hidden behind the scenes process that has gone on for you for the last roughly 2 years, since November 2021. This is some kind of shift at a deep layer of your identity, like that, the sort of unconscious or subconscious layer that you can't easily see into. The 12th house refers to places, that place where your intuition just pops up out of nowhere, like seemingly nowhere. There's these glimmers of insights or these visions even that can pop out that you just don't know where it came from, you know? And the reality is, this is what the 12th house represents. It's one of the hardest houses to describe because it is referring to all the things that are unseen, you know? So this is your own patterns, but also more things out there in the kind of spiritual world, for lack of a better word, bigger picture, things like that. So that's some of what you're thinking about, like what shift has occurred. And in that shift, what has gone on was some kind of reckoning with what stability really means to you. I mean, perhaps before that process started, you thought it was one thing, or maybe you didn't really think much about it because it's in your 12th house. But now it has been stirred up. There's some kind of wake up process or some kind of wake up call that has dramatically altered, really, it's your relationship to yourself, the deeper layers of yourself. I mean, that's what this eclipse is showing you. And we're at the end of this, Taurus Scorpio thing. So you get to kind of close this chapter down. Like, what have you learned? What can you celebrate about what has shifted, you know? And then where do you want to go next? I mean, that's some of what's coming up here.
Yeah, it's really a time to celebrate the inner work that you've done. You know, there's been, it is interesting to think of having Taurus in that 12th house, and sort of for the, you know, depending obviously on your own personal chart, but just as a generalization, with Taurus in that 12th house, your stable inner unconscious mind is probably something you always kind of counted on without knowing it, because it's, you know, it's unseen, it's the unconscious. But with Uranus going through there, and the nodes going through those two houses, there's been a lot of shifting and changing, a lot of big changes in this area. And like you said, Jennie, this is a moment at this full moon eclipse. This is really a moment to celebrate the internal work you've done, and whether that shows up for you individually as psychological work, or spiritual work or a combination of the two. There's some inner work process that you've been through that you're closing the door on that for another 18 years in terms of this particular dynamic. Won't reoccur for another 18 years. So you want to really celebrate the work you've done as you move into a new pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the fact that we're in Scorpio season, you've got to kind of look at the other end of the polarity too. And what the statement here is with the sun and Scorpio in your 6th house all throughout Scorpio season is it's just bringing to mind those routines, those practices and those routines. And I mean, really it's the way you tangibly produce your spiritual vision. I mean, so it could be a meditation practice. It could be the way you exercise, the way you care for your health. I mean, kind of recognizing body is temple here. I mean, there's a little bit of that on this polarity. Like, how do you really take care of your health and prioritize that? And with Scorpio there's a huge piece about incorporating your emotional being into that. Like, you can't leave the emotions behind. I mean, the 6th house for you with Gemini rising is a wonderful place to work through your emotional issues, and to put those intense emotions into your workouts, into your daily routines, and into your connections. I mean, that's something that could be extremely helpful, because the Taurus Scorpio axis is about like the reality, but then also dealing with the emotional repercussions. So you've got your spiritual and psychological health, and you need to deal with your emotional health. So those all work together, and Scorpio season is giving an opportunity to really look at all of those things together.
And if you, if you have been engaged in some form of therapy, I think you might have brought it up in our earlier conversation about these things is, somatic work, working with your body to understand your internal processes. And there's so much in the culture going on that level that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
In this polarity in particular, the 6th and the 12th is dealing with all things health. And yeah, I like the way you brought that up too, because it's like the mental piece and the body piece, and how do they come together and they work together. And all of that is enabling you to deal with some of the deeper emotional stuff that's kind of harder to confront, and that's what, so you really hopefully can look back on these last 18 months or 2 years and really just be like, oh, okay, what have I done? What has changed in that time? Mm-hmm. And the other thing would be introducing this idea of like having some kind of talisman to remind you, some sort of tangible thing that you could easily put in your pocket or put on your desk, or, something that you can see. And then the 12th house, what actually came to my mind with the 12th house is I have a friend who did yoga teacher training, and at the end of that, they walked away with their own mala beads. So having the mala beads, in your pocket as a reminder, or hanging somewhere where you can see them, that would be a really good example. Y'all got to figure out your own, like, what other suggestions you have for that, Laurie?
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking, this talisman is to remind you of the work that you've done, to remind you that you're closing down a chapter, to remind you of what you've accomplished. So yes, anything. I love the idea of mala beads. That would be a great thing if that's something that you utilize. But the strange thought that came to my mind was, if you started, this is just going to sound ridiculous, but this is what came to mind, is your therapist's appointment card. Probably nobody even knows what a therapist appointment card is, because I don't think anybody gets those appointment cards anymore, because they get text messages that remind them of all their appointments. But that was what I thought of, like the very first time you went to your new therapist 18 months ago, you kept that as a souvenir. So that was what came to my mind. But I like the idea of anything, get a little rock, imbue it with meaning. You can always use something like that, but find something that reminds you of the internal work you've done, whether it's been spiritual work or psychological work, something that you can hold on to through this full moon. Keep it with you for a couple of days to really honor your process.
Yeah, I was thinking, what came to my mind was like, because of the 6th house thing, like a wristband, like a sweatband, you know, that you put in your pocket just to remind you of your spiritual work, you know. It's totally ridiculous. But anyway, I think you get the point. Like just trying to have something that you can touch base with to remind you of these deeply internal processes and to celebrate yourself a little bit during these crazy times, you know.
And then the one last thing I want to say is if you figure out a talisman and you're going to use it, leave us a note. Tell us about it. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's move on to those of you with Cancer rising. So with Cancer rising, this Taurus full moon is falling in your 11th house. So this brings your attention to what has changed over the last 18 months or so. What has been the upheaval, the shift, the change that's occurred for you in relation to your community or how you allow yourself to be supported by others? You know, that 11th house is really, you know, it's not our best friends. It's not, it's the community that supports us to what our needs and desires are. So think about what community needs to you. Think about the work that you've done in that area, the changes that you've made, because that is, for those of you with Cancer rising, it's an area where you really want that area to be very, very stable. You want a solid community that supports you. And yet with Uranus moving through that area, this past couple of years, there's been a lot of changes there. And particularly with the nodal axis between those two houses, the last 18 months has been, you've gone through a lot of learning in that area. And that learning is kind of reflected in the Scorpio house across the way there in the area of creativity. So, you know, how is your creativity received in community? There may be some element there that you can look at, some element, some way in which your creativity or your children or how you give of yourself is reflected in what you're receiving from community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is, it's just funny because I invite you, those of you with Cancer rising, to think about, you know, whatever creative processes that you tend to be drawn to, you know, and if you don't think of yourself as a creative person, you just need to alter your view, which is kind of what this eclipse is about, because everybody has a creative aspect to them. The fifth house also refers to the way you give of yourself. So that can be your playfulness, as well as with Scorpio here, deep creative pursuits. You know, but you want to think about the way that these two areas of life play together. I mean, maybe you're in a situation, which is actually where I am, where my community's changed because a few people have had babies recently, you know, in this 2-year period we're talking about. So, you know, my 11th house community has changed because in the 5th house of children, friends have had children. So, you know, so this doesn't mean, so do I need to walk away from that community? No. I just need to change my expectation of what that community is. And now it's got new life in it. It's got this whole new twist, you know, it's a whole change. And so, but it's a good example of thinking about like you altering like what your view is, what your community is supposed to be, and then really just letting everything but kind of be shed away from that and come up with, well, what is the community and what is the moment and what is the stability in the moment? And it's the stability of new life in my personal case. But for each of you, I really invite you to think about, how does your creative pursuits and your creative process show up in your community? I mean, another thing is maybe you feel like, my community's changed, I don't fit in. So you've deeply immersed yourself in some sort of creative action. You know, that would be another manifestation. But at some point, probably you're going to show that creative stuff to a community, you know, so there's this constant dance between these two areas. And at a simple level, the giving of love, your creative thing, the receiving of love. So how do you give of yourself? How do you receive yourself? How has that changed? You know,
I love hearing you talk about that on a really personal level and thinking about you know, for you, particularly with the children coming in and having that be a change and like, oh my God, what, you know, my expectations of my community didn't include this. And then having the reflection of, you know, you may not want children, but what creative new life can you bring? You know, so there's that. You don't have to have children to bring another creative component. And maybe, yeah, I mean, I could go down a rabbit hole with that, but it is really interesting to think how your creativity supports your expectation of the stability of a community.
Yeah.
So, you know, at this moment, with this being the closing down of the eclipses being in these two houses for you, there's a way in which, you know, I think our job at this full moon is to honor the change, to really kind of try to understand the change, look at the change, honor it in order to move on. So we've talked a lot with the earlier individual ones about having a talisman that you can hold on to. Taurus is so tactile and so much in need of something tangible. So thinking about what would a talisman be that you could put in your pocket or put on your mantle or whatever, where you would see it every day, that would represent the change of your community. Since this is your storyline, Jennie, what do you think of for a talisman here?
Well, for me, the perfect thing is I have some photographs of my community prior to, you know, things changing. And what those photographs show is just the joy of being together. You know, so I think it's like that photograph, even though it's changed, it doesn't need to be a new photograph. It's actually what is the moment of that community, you know? So something like that. Now that's something that has to sit on your on your desk or your mantle or whatever you know, wherever you're going to look at it daily, or maybe you have a place where you meditate or what have you. But also it could be something more tangible than that. It could be some other representation of something to do with a group of friends. I mean, or a group or whatever community you're part of. You know, I mean, you've got to think about what's personal to you and what has meaning to you. And I think that that's really what you want to think about. You know, there's probably a bunch of other examples, but do you have any thoughts?
Not really. You know, and when I don't have any thoughts on this, my go-to is, like you've said a few times, get a special stone and imbue that stone with the meaning that you're looking for. Because yeah, it's kind of hard to think of something that would represent community. A photo like that, that's ideal. And you can make a photocopy of it and carry it around with you.
I know. Well, I was thinking too. I mean, it could be that, you know, maybe I mean, there could be some other representations, like maybe you traveled with a group of friends or something like that, or community, part of your community, and there's something from that trip, or, you know, there's probably something you can think of that is very personal to you. There's lots of different ways. I invite you to imbue this with creativity because it is your 5th and 11th house. So, but anyway, really powerful time to just accept a new story and to find a new way of feeling stable, you know, in a different way.
Yeah. Find that stability in that area, even in the midst of profound change. And, you know, like you said, your community has changed a lot, but can you still feel the stability in it?
Oh yeah. And right. And it's exactly, this is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. This is more like shedding your own filter about your expectations and seeing things more how they really are, and seeing the gifts in how things, what you do have.
I think that's perfect. I think that's perfect. Let's move on now to folks who have Leo rising.
So with Leo rising, this Taurus lunar eclipse is falling in your 10th house of profession and career. So the first thing you want to think about is, what kind of process have you been involved in since late 2021, November 2021, that involves your profession? Like, what changes have happened? What way have you woken up to, you know, how you want to handle this area of your life? I mean, this area of life is really your social reputation. It's how you show up in public. So even if you just, you know, you may not have a profession per se, but nonetheless, it's how you show up in the most public way. And there's been a big shift in this area. You've had Uranus going through this area, so there's been some kind of wake up, probably about how you're spending your time, because we spend so much time in this part of life, right? Most of us. So there's some sort of wake up that's gone on here, and there's some way in which there's, I don't know, you need to find stability in a new way. I mean, that's kind of the question you need to ask yourself, is what does stability really look like? I mean, maybe your job has completely changed. Maybe you have a new career track you're on, or, you know, or maybe you're just in the same old thing, but you need a new viewpoint. I mean, all of those are totally valid, you know, and more. So those are kind of, that's where your attention is being drawn, put it that way. And during the Scorpio season, there has been a major shift as well in your roots and your family structure. You know, there's some way in which these two areas of life very, very much play together, and paint a story. So what is your story that's gone on here?
Oh. Yeah. What's your new stability? The stability that you believed you held in the area of your career or your reputation isn't the same. It's been through a lot of changes. So what I think of this full moon as really a moment to celebrate the new path that you're on, because this is the end of the eclipses being here in this house. It's a full moon, so it's really a moment of celebrating how far you've come and what the change is, and the challenges that come from the home area, the family area, are really just mirroring to you the importance of allowing that change, to allowing stability within that change. I think that's so much the key to all of this, is finding a point of stability in the midst of upheaval.
Mm-hmm.
So you've learned in the midst of upheaval around your career, upheaval and change in that area, you're finding over this last 18 months, you've really been working to develop a different point of stability here.
Yeah. It's like really that tricky balance of what thing do you want to carry forwards, that is your inner stability, and then what things do you need to let go of? I mean, that's Scorpio and Taurus kind of speak to that question. And we've been talking a lot, like each of these, we're sort of offering up this idea of carrying a talisman during this period to remind yourself of where you've come from, how far you've come, what kind of work have you done, what kinds of things have come to light. And so in this case of the 10th house, just thinking about something that really represents whatever change you've gone through in your workplace. And again, this can be something visual, like a certificate or a picture of something that you can see, but also even more ideal would be something tangible that you put in your pocket that just helps you remember, oh yeah, I'm doing this totally differently now, and with Taurus, it's really easy to think of something like a pebble or a rock or something like that you can feel. But think for yourself, Leo, rising, like, what do you have that represents this dramatic change in your professional life that can help keep you on track?
Yeah, this change that is helping to renew stability. I mean, Uranus is still going to be in here for a long time further, so there's more change coming, but this particular past 18 months has delivered some very, very important change in this area. And we talk about career, job, vocation, but it's also, not everybody has a job or a vocation. It can also be just how the world sees you. It can be your reputation, the you that is understood, not on a real personal level, like your ascendant, but on a bigger level, a more distanced level, your reputation rather than your personality. So what is it that you thought was a stable personality, a stable reputation, a stable job, that has gone through a big metamorphosis here, and now you're celebrating the fact that you have regained a level of stability, even if it's just moment to moment? you know, in the midst of upheaval, how you can hold that stability and hold your own understanding of what your vocation is, who you are in that outer world place. So as far as a talisman, yeah, that's a tricky one, especially when we want to keep it to something small you can keep in your pocket. Maybe it's, I don't know, anything, you know, maybe it's your small stapler from your desk at work. I don't know. Yeah.
Or like, you know, a copy of the key that you've been given because you have a promotion and you have a new, you know, I don't know, but just kind of silly and whatever, but it doesn't really matter. That the point is, how do you bring these more kind of sacred ideas into the ordinary, the daily, so you can remember, you know, the shifts. It's just a little reminder. We can all use a reminder where we come from. So,
and I love it. You know, with Taurus, it's such a good idea to have something tangible to represent what's going on. So yeah, put it in your pocket. Drop us a note below here if you've got like the ideal talisman, or even if it's not an ideal one, give us a note. Tell us what you're going to use for that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to folks who have Virgo rising. With Virgo rising, the shift and the change is really, it's really in your worldview. For the past 18 months, with the nodal axis being between your 9th and your 3rd house, there's been a lot of growth and change in your worldview. And it's really interesting to think about having Taurus in that area, you know, from throughout your life, where Taurus is an area where you tend to have a stable opinion, or you have stability there. So you can think, if you've got Virgo rising, your worldview has maintained a lot of stability until Uranus moved in there. What year did Uranus move in again? 2018?
Yeah.
Is that right? 2018. Uranus moved in there, and your worldview has been through a lot of change. We don't necessarily like change or want change in the area where Taurus is. It can be a surprise. And I think one of the ways that I think about it is that, you know, all this kind of upheaval started in 2018. And then when the nodes moved in there 18 months ago, it's through that process that I feel like we have really learned to accept the change and understand the change in a much deeper way. And now at this full moon, we have the opportunity to celebrate the change, to see and understand what our new level of stability within that area is.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting with Virgo rising and having Taurus in your 9th house. It really suggests a person who offers a sort of stabilization to others, you know, through the passing of knowledge, you know. And on one hand, that can be, you know, I guess you could get kind of stuck because it's Taurus, you know, you could get kind of stuck with it's this way, it's this way, it's this way. And during these last 18 months, like you just keep thinking about newly turned up soil. You've probably had to turn up some new soil in your personal worldview, you know, and how you look at things. You know, and so therefore, on the other hand, you know, you really do have so much to offer others as a source of stability, so that they can learn essentially from you in order to incorporate that for themselves, like so they can learn how to create their own source of inner stability. I mean, there's some interplay here. Is that 9th house? There's really so much knowledge and wisdom that comes from experience that is really being put on display here. Yeah. And then having Scorpio down in the 3rd house, that sort of just brings it into the everyday. You know, like the 9th house is like big picture, worldview, blah, blah, blah. And then you come into the 3rd house and that's like, okay, well, where do you get your groceries? You know, like how do you share that big worldview on a personal level? And because you have Scorpio here, there's a lot of power to take those big picture ideas and make them understandable in just your daily life, like how you talk to the person who brought your mail.
How do you
Right?
communicate? How do you communicate those big ideas?
Exactly.
In your communication. And, I think it's important also that we just, the ninth house, we're talking about it as worldview, but it's all the things that kind of relate to that. The ninth house can really bring in ideas of travel and education and religion, politics, even all these things that open our minds to increase our understanding of this big world picture. And publishing is also something that's a ninth house thing. So that's kind of bringing your worldview into the wider public as well, or teaching, all of those things. It's an interesting way. So at this point of this full moon, you're celebrating the accomplishments, the ability to take on a new piece of work in that very stable area as it's changed a lot.
And just having a new view of what is that stability, what is that new view that has been cultivated, that's come from a new place,
and how has it been cultivated through the day-to-day. I think about this because this is mine, and it's just so interesting to think about the day-to-day writing in that third house. And then, getting my book deal. I mean, that's a very ninth house thing. And it's definitely been within this 18-month period. So now it's like, okay, time to wrap up that story and move it into the next area. So what about the talisman, Jennie?
Well, I know. I mean, that's the other piece here is like, okay, so what's the reminder? So that because you watch this video and then you go back to your life and you've forgotten whatever the thing was that you're supposed to be focusing on or whatever. And it's like, what you really want with Taurus is some kind of tangible takeaway, and again, I always think of, we've been thinking a lot about just the simple idea of having a stone, that you really like, a rock in your pocket, as a reminder. And, and in this case, I thought, well, the stone or the rock's great, but what if you put a seed in your pocket, because you're spreading seeds here, and I actually was thinking about this beautiful seed I found the other day that's from a tree in Mexico, and I haven't been down there for a while. So just this idea of like something that has life in it, could be many, many other things. I mean, there could be, like, I think you said, if you can fit a book in your pocket, you can, but or maybe it's a talisman from a teacher that a teacher gave you. That really helps you with that. Just be open to that source of wisdom. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm sure those of you who are listening, like, you have an idea of what this is, like some kind of, it could also be, oh, I know, you said something about like a ticket, like a travel ticket. I mean, I know everything's online these days, but not everything, some ticket that is to an experience that you had, Yeah,
that's a great idea. That's great. That house is so much about experience and just bringing in. So have a talisman, something that reminds you of the hard work you've done to change something regarding your understanding of the world, your worldview. So some sort of a talisman that really is meaningful to you. Leave us a note below if you use something there. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. So I think we're ready to move on to folks who have Libra rising.
So Libra rising, this lunar eclipse is falling in your 8th house. Interesting house for Libra rising. So think back to the last 18 months, like I guess till November 2021 is about what we've been talking about, and just think about all the things that have changed in that time frame, in specifically in reference to how you deal with other people, other people's values, other people's baggage, other people's issues. There's some deep process that has gone on for you that is absolutely vital to your development as a Libra rising person. There's just something really, really important here. And it has to do with not only how do you kind of navigate, like how do you have boundaries, how do you navigate, other people with your boundaries, and boundaries kind of move and change. You know, they're not rigid, they are meant to move and change. But with Taurus, there might be a little bit of a struggle with setting boundaries that become walls. And it might be that some of your questions have been about that. You know, on the other hand, you might have no boundaries, you know, in certain areas, you know, and think that it can only be very black and white. So there's some sort of query or change has happened in the way that you deal with your boundaries with other people. I mean, that is essentially what's going on here. And because it's in that area of other people's stuff, it is very naturally highlighting the way you value yourself. I mean, if you go back and listen to our Scorpio season video, you'll hear a lot of stuff about your self-worth, you know, and how you deal with your finances, because that's what Scorpio season is highlighting. And at this full moon, the sun in Scorpio is kind of shining that light into how does the way you deal with boundaries with other people affect the way you value yourself. I mean, there's a strong interplay here. So the question is, how do you feel stable in dealing with other people's stuff? What is a new learning you have had about what it means to feel stable in the face of other people's stuff?
I think it's so interesting to think about just going through a lot of changes in that area over this last 18 months. And, you know, just to kind of expand out on that 8th house a little bit, other people's values. You know, we can think in this house about, well, I always go back to my early learning of some of these things. And early on, what I learned about the 8th house was it was about sex, death, and taxes. You know, and that seems a little like, what's that got to do with other people's values? Well, you know, the way I think about it is, you know, fun sex is down here in the 5th house. When we get to the 8th house, it's where we bump into people's baggage, what they carry. And, you know, obviously people carry a lot of baggage around within their sexuality. And so that's a place where we are navigating our partner's issues. Death is also a place where we have to navigate other people's beliefs. It's not our beliefs, you know, and you've probably heard me say this on other videos if you watch a lot of our videos, but that 8th house, I think, you know, if your grandmother's dying and she's a devout Catholic, you're going to sit there with the rosary with her. You're not going to tell her your ideas of, you know, Wiccan or Buddhism or whatever it is. You're going to sit there with the rosary with her, because this is such a deep house. It is where we learn how to connect with others who do not see the world through the same filters that we do. And it's also shared values and shared resources. This can be a place of issues around inheritance, other people's money, all kinds of things where other people's values and beliefs are something that you have to navigate. That's where the boundaries come in. So not to kind of beat on that, but I just think that it's really important to think about what is it in that, you know, what's the process been in this past 18 months of you learning how to navigate someone else's whatever, you know, has someone close to you died? Has someone close to you inherited a lot of money and you suddenly have to navigate that? That can be just as difficult.
I know there's also just, you know, there's a lot of deaths, small deaths in relationships, of having to let go of your expectation, or having to let go of, you thought the person was one way and now you've learned a deeper level, and then you're faced with a choice. Do you stay with it? Do you move on? What, you know, these things happen all the time. And I think that this 8th house, there's a lot of layers to it, but it's really a tip of the hat to there's so many layers in our relationships. And what's funny about the 8th house is, even though it's a it's above the horizon, so it's very much dealing with the world out there. But the irony is there's a lot of self-knowledge that needs to come about in order to know, like you said, in order to sit with your grandmother with the rosary when she's passing away, there's some things that you've had to do to be able to get to that. I mean, if you're 16 years old, you might be like, screw that, I don't believe in that. You're right. But like, you've grown and changed, or maybe you have, over the years, or so there's a lot of stuff in here about you working with you in order to know how to do this. And that there's a juxtaposition here, and then with this polarity, it really is just worth valuing yourself, valuing other people. What is self-respect? What is respecting other people's values? I think there's a respect theme in these two houses that don't talk a whole lot about, but I think it's super vital,
I think that's really, I'm glad you said that, because I think that's really good. Yeah. That's interesting. So at this full moon, we're putting something aside. We've learned a lot in this area. We've developed a renewed sense of stability here. The stability we came into this with 18 months ago is probably very different than what it is now. There will continue to be changes, but at this moment, we're celebrating how far we've come, and we're getting ready to move into the next of the eclipses that will not any longer be in Taurus and Scorpio. So in order to honor this process, we've been talking about, because Taurus is so tactile, we've been talking about putting a talisman in our pocket or holding on to something that really reminds us and supports what we have learned in this area over the last 18 months. What do you think that talisman could be?
In the 8th house, boy, I mean, I'm just thinking about, there's a lot of things it could be with an 8th house, but I think it might need to be something that symbolized an ending, that represented, I mean, it could be something else, but just the idea of like a place where you really needed to set a boundary and you did it, and you found a new level of self-respect. I mean, so it could be something that represents that ending, whatever that is, whether it's a relationship or it could be of a death,
It could be your grandmother's rosary beads.
It could, exactly. Like, and you're gonna have to determine for yourself, Libra rising, like, what has this learning been specifically around boundaries, and what symbol do you have in your life, in your house, on your little, if you have a little altar or whatever it is that you do, that can bring that right into your pocket so that you remember, because it's like kind of like, how do you bring the sacred, the ordinary into the sacred, and vice versa. So like having something, if you're not sure what it is, I'd say just go for a walk, pick up a stone, and just let it be that representation. It doesn't, but anyway, I think you're going to know what it is when you really start thinking about it. So tell us.
Stones are so magical. Stones are so magical because they are a part of the earth, and you can imbue them with meaning. You can hold them, and you can really work with them. I collect stones everywhere I go, and occasionally I have to bring them and disperse them in other places because my house gets a little heavy.
You're gonna confuse the future geologists.
I remember Martina made so much fun of me because when I moved, I had like 3 boxes of rocks. She's like, "You're moving with boxes of rocks." Anyway, I digress. Okay. Let's move on to folks who have Scorpio rising. So for those of you with Scorpio rising, this full moon is happening right there in your 7th house. So the 7th house is very simple. It is the other. It is your primary relationships, whether they be romantic relationships, marriage partner, a business partner. It's sort of a very close friend can be a 7th house thing. It's sort of, I think of the 7th house as kind of an equal partnership. 2 people coming together, you and I sitting across the table is a 7th house relationship. So if you've got Scorpio rising, this is an area where for the last 18 months, the nodes have been going through your 1st and 7th houses, and you've been through a lot of change in the area of relationship. That may mean that your relationship has ended and you've started a new one. It may mean that you have changed your expectation of yourself in a relationship. It's not any one way. Yeah, it's really important that you understand that these things don't necessarily mean, you don't want to ever throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You want to really understand that the change may be within you, not necessarily within the other person. But there's a big change that has occurred. And, actually this area with Taurus in the 7th house, you kind of approach your life as though the relationship is the stable place, is a very stable place in your life. And yet since Uranus moved in there back in 2018, there's been a lot of shifting dynamics there within your expectation or within a partner themselves. And over the last 18 months, you've been really processing, creating a new stability there. I think that's how I like to think about it. It's like you've been really working to develop a new kind of stability within yourself and how you approach relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too. Always thinking about how, if you've got Scorpio rising there in your 1st house, and it's like the polar opposite thing in your 7th house. I mean, that's the case for everybody. But it is really interesting because the Scorpio rising speaks to, somebody who's got an interest in the deeper layers of things. He wants to really get down and investigate what's like lying beneath everything, and then yet it has this like just wants simplicity in the partnership. So I think it is a great time to think about exactly like what has changed. Like, has it felt tumultuous to you, or has it felt refreshing and like fresh new energy? That's the first place to start is, what is, and what are the two ends of that? It might be both, might be kind of scary, some changes, but it also might be like, oh, well, thank goodness there's new life here, because I mean, especially like long-term relationships, they can be tough, and you do need to keep renewing them and refreshing them. And it doesn't mean you chuck it out and every time that you're uncomfortable, like, no, it's like what you're saying, Laurie. It's like this process of looking at your stuff, yourself, and like, what are you bringing to the partnership, and how can you also increase like the feeling of refreshment or bring something new to it. I mean, it is interesting. And I mean, during Scorpio season, there's a lot of focus on just this kind of like, what does it mean to be a Scorpio rising? What things are coming to light? Like, what things do you need to let go of? What things do you need to allow to become more important to you? I mean, there's a dance with that. I mean, at its core, that's what this lunar eclipse is bringing up. The like, what are the things of worth? What makes life worth living, and what makes your partnership very worthwhile? And then what things can you let go of?
I love thinking about that polarity with people with Scorpio rising of, the intensity of the personality, and yet at the same time, the desire for so much stability in the partnership. And yeah, this is really a time of looking at how your expectations of a partner have changed.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, I see this combination as being really helpful though, too, because it's pretty easy, I think, with Scorpio rising to feel just very sensitized to the world around you, to see a lot of the harder things in the world around you, to like really be able to recognize people's wounds, and like feel them. And then just to have this kind of sanctuary in your partnership. I mean, that I could see how that can work together. And also how it could be quite challenging to find a relationship or to be the kind of partner you want to be, to help have that happen and have that stability happen. So
I laughed because I was married to someone with this once.
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
All
right. Tell us the story.
Yeah. That's a story, but I wasn't the most stable partner, I have to say. So I was way too young, and sorry, I digressed into that, but let's talk about the talisman. We've been talking about, at the Taurus full moon, Taurus is so tangible and so physical. And this is sort of because it's the closing down of this period of time with the nodes in Scorpio and Taurus. So we're kind of saying goodbye to a process that we've really dug into over the last 18 months. And we're really honoring the change that has occurred over this period of time. So if you think about those of you with Scorpio rising, think about, what little thing could you hold on to that could represent the change that has occurred within your expectations of relationship or within your relationships themselves.
Yeah.
What would be a good talisman there, Jennie?
Well, it's pretty obvious, really, because this is one of the few places in our society where you automatically go with a talisman. If you choose to get married, you usually have a ring involved, and that ring is a talisman and a symbol of your marriage. So, I mean, even if that's not the thing that you're choosing and you're not married or whatever else, I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about, like that you have this symbol and you physically wear it so that you are reminded, and so, I mean, it could be on one very simple level. If you are in a partnership and you do have a wedding band and that is the thing that you want to focus on, great, imbue it with new recognition. Wow, this is a symbol of the work I've done in the last 18 months. That might not be it at all, and that's fine, but the concept remains, the idea of having something you can touch, something that's small enough to be in your pocket or on your person somehow, just to remind you of what's gone on in this 18th month period. I mean, there are other things it could be. It could be a photograph of somebody important to you. It could be, we talk about this sometimes as the polarity where you get some therapy because you're sitting in a one-on-one thing with a therapist or an astrologer. I mean, other one-on-one situations. So you could also incorporate that in some way, like, knowing what date that is and writing it on a card and putting it in your pocket as a reminder. What do you think? What do you got?
Well, always, and I feel like we keep saying this, but it's really true. You can always go for a walk, find a stone of some sort, and imbue that with the meaning that you're looking for. That's always a good Taurus talisman. Stones are, it's part of the earth. So yeah, to have something that represents the change that you've been through, whether the change has been a positive change, a difficult change, whatever the change has been, it's putting you on a new path. And you want to really celebrate the work that you've done.
Nice. Excellent.
All right. So let's move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising.
So Sagittarius rising, this lunar eclipse is falling in your 6th house. So this is a great time to recognize what kinds of changes have happened in the way you deal with your routines and your practices, and I mean, ultimately take care of your physical health. What kinds of changes have happened since November of 2021? Because that's when we first had these eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus. So you just want to think about that longer process of what has gone on. And ideally, it's like you've really gone into this process of understanding a new level of stability. So before this whole thing happened, maybe you were thinking it's one thing, you needed things to be maybe kind of rigid and be a certain way because you have Taurus in the 6th house and it needed to be like this. And then in these last, 18 months or so, you've allowed some big changes to happen. And I mean, I know it depends on what's going on in your life and everybody's got a different story. But really you want to sort of celebrate what changes have you been able to make in your routines, because in some way it's being unearthed. There's some new soil that has been dug up that you've been forced to kind of look at because you've had Uranus going through here and these eclipses. So that's where you really want your attention focus, is what has shifted about your routines. Again, this might be how you eat. This is your sleeping stuff. This is like all the things you do to get ready for work. And it also includes your preventative healthcare stuff, like, so do you go see your doctor regularly? Do you get massages if that's something you help you release stress? I mean, and in fact, that's a good way to think about it. What is your relationship to stress? What habits have you been able to take on to help alleviate some of the stresses that just normally accumulate in our lives. So that's really what has your attention right now, in a nutshell.
I really like that you brought up the issue of stress, because with Taurus in that house, you don't want stress in your day-to-day routines, but there has been, there has been ever since Uranus moved in there some years ago. There's been a lot of shifting sands here, and you've learned how to, how to work with this in a new way over this last 18 months. So you really want to celebrate that. You really want to acknowledge how far you've come, and possibly, you may have been through some real health issues over this period of time. You may have really had to change your diet or your routines because of health issues. But what really has needed to change is your understanding of what is important for your body, how to care for your body at this period of time. What's stability like for your body at this time?
Yeah, there might be some kind of reckoning of like, what is your new normal? I mean, and for positive or not so positive, I mean, if you have gotten, been unfortunate enough to receive some sort of health diagnosis or something like that, then you're forced to find a new normal, and although that can be unpleasant and scary and those kinds of things, I think there is a way in which you can find a deeper level of stability deeper within yourself. I mean, you kind of need to, so that you can continue to function in your life and move on. Like, I don't want to, paint a pretty picture all the time. We all have complications in our lives, and that could be a complication that has occurred, and I mean, I hate that whole thing when people are like, oh, it's a blessing in disguise. Like, you get to decide that. I'm not saying that, you gotta, if you are indeed struggling with some health issues, but there is a way in which you can have a reckoning about what do you consider important in your life, and what kinds of things are you going to let get to you and stress you out, and what kinds of things are you like, no, I'm done letting that stress me out. So there can be a massive rearranging of the to-do list when things like that happen. So all of those are potentially topics on the table. So you'll have to decide what's right for you, and all through the Scorpio season, there's been a kind of a behind the scenes need to kind of dig deeper into subconscious patterns to understand what's going on there too. So there's a lot going on for Sagittarius rising here.
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot in that 18 months of really reckoning with how your inner unconscious patterns create your health and your routines, how they impact each other. And you've learned a lot about that. Regardless of where you stand now, you've learned a lot throughout this period of time that is helping you understand how to support yourself. I like that you said, you're kind of a new normal. It's a new normal. So as we say goodbye to the nodes being in these two houses, this is sort of the wrap up. It's the wrap up of the 18 months of that learning. So there could be a real relief here on the other side of this, as well as you move into a new area of concern. So let's think about one thing we've been talking about is having a talisman to represent the change that you've been through and the new normal that you're finding, the new place of stability within your care for your body. So what would be a good talisman for this person with Sagittarius rising, Jennie?
Well, I just, I was thinking about those, a worry stone.
Oh, yeah.
Like, right? Because I mean, we've said this a million times already through this video, the idea of like having a tangible thing, but I think it's really important, because you do want something, and a worry stone is just, this little piece you have in your pocket that you can kind of, squeeze and like feel in your pocket, and to help you. I mean, it's kind of funny to release stress a little bit. But I'd like to invite you to take it to a little bit further of a level where it's the thing that reminds you of how you felt a new way to, you found a new way to deal with stress.
Yeah.
So that's my simple go-to. I mean, there could be a lot of other things like where you can celebrate something about your fitness or your health or some new commitment you've made, to getting body work because it's absolutely vital. I mean, there's something along those lines. I mean, and you and I were talking about that whole somatic piece too, of like the body and the emotions, so there's something that you want in your pocket that is going to let you remember where you've come from and, the comfort level with your new normal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think stones are always good, of any sort, but I love the idea of a worry stone for sixth house, because there does tend to be that issue of, it's care for the body. And there's always a little worry about our bodies because we don't know really what's going on in there most of the time.
Yeah.
And worry stones, it's like worrying something,
Yeah.
those little worry stones that have kind of a divot for your thumb to worry it,
Yeah.
using worry as a verb. It's kind of interesting to think about that. But whatever you decide would be a good talisman, use that, put it in your pocket, use it as a reminder of the work that you've done, and leave us a note and tell us what you think of that and what you're using. Okay, so now we are going to move on to those of you who have Capricorn rising. This puts the Taurus full moon eclipse in your fifth house. So the focus here is around issues of how you give of yourself, how you give yourself freely, whether that is to a creative process, to a new love affair, to children. The fifth house is really, it's kind of the fun house. It's where we really have pleasure, where we take risks for pleasure. It's where we give of ourselves. You think about, I mostly at this point, I think about the fifth house a lot as just our creativity, because all of these things are our creativity. Our children are our creative project for many, many years. If you've got a new lover, guess what? That's your creative project for that period of time. So this is really the area of your creativity. And with Taurus there, those of you with Capricorn rising tend to think of this area as a very stable place. Maybe, you may see this place as a place of great beauty and great stability. But then again, in 2018, when Uranus moved in there, the stability kind of shifted. The sands shifted, because Uranus just wants to create excitement or upheaval, and stability isn't really what Uranus is looking for. So there's been a lot of changes ever since then. There's been changes in this area, and maybe a lack of stability. There may have been a lot of anxiety around this area of creativity. And yet about 18 months ago, when the nodes moved in here, you started really putting some serious effort into kind of reformulating your expectations, maybe, of what this creative area could be for you. So, you've done a lot of work for the past 18 months. You've done a lot of work, and what your expectations of your own creativity were 18 months ago are probably quite different now. And this period of time, this full moon, is really showing us, what we've been through. And this is the end of the Taurus Scorpio eclipses. This is the last one. We're wrapping up this 18-month story. So this is a time to celebrate how far you've come.
It's so interesting how with Capricorn rising, it puts Taurus in that fifth house, and, Taurus is stability and all these things that you've just mentioned. And yet the fifth house is also how we take risks, and all the things you also mentioned about the creative process involves risks. I mean, whether you're, you have a new lover, it's like, well, there's the big risk of falling in love and not being being unrequited, basically, or there's always risk involved if you're working the sort of children end of things here, where you're, concerned about those children. There's a vulnerability there. So it's kind of funny how it's like the most stable sign, and yet it's the riskiest area of your life. So I think there's been a real query in your life, Capricorn rising, around that. What does it mean to take risks? What feels risky? When is it worth taking risk and risking that stable feeling to do something new and different? I mean, I think that's the big question for Capricorn rising, is right there, and just finding, like, letting yourself be comfortable with discomfort. I mean, there's something about that theme, because Taurus wants to be comfortable, but in your 5th house, you've got to take risks here. So there's this constant theme around comfort, discomfort, and what that means, and pushing yourself. And, and then in the meantime, with Scorpio on the 11th house, you really need a lot of depth in your community. There's a desire for mystery and depth and this sort of investigative ideas, that go along with community. Like, you just don't want simple picnic. Like, you want real, things to wrestle with and work with Scorpio in the 11th house. So there's a very interesting interplay here, I think, at this closing lunar eclipse of, the question of risk and risk in groups, and how has this impacted your community. There's something very fruitful in there for you to think about. I mean, overall, that's where I go with it. In Capricorn rising, it's like there's a seriousness and a desire to be authoritative, and then you've got this place where you really just need to take risks.
That's interesting. I like how you talked about that. I don't know. There's something about bringing the risk idea into that 5th house that really shifts it, and you start thinking about, anytime you do any of those 5th house things, you are taking a risk. You go and you buy a bunch of art supplies and start delving into your creativity. You're taking a risk. Somebody's going to see it and they're going to judge you, maybe, whatever. You decide you're going to have a child, man, is there a risk there? You don't know. You can't. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what you're going to get. Anything. Falling in love is certainly a risk. So that whole area has been a place of big changes. So you really want to celebrate how far you've come, the risks that you have been willing to take, the risks that have kind of been foisted upon you in some way, maybe by the community. But there's been changes there. So this is a time to celebrate how far you've come. And we've been talking a lot in these about having a tangible thing to remind you of how far you've come in this past 18 months, to have some sort of a talisman that represents this change, and putting that in your pocket and holding on to it and really honoring the process that you've been through. So Jennie, do you have any ideas of what a talisman would be for the person with Capricorn rising?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking with Taurus in the 5th house, there's also a whole piece about beauty, and art, because it's Venus rules Taurus. There's a real desire for aesthetically pleasing things here, so I think whatever you put in your pocket, it needs to be something beautiful that you really think is gorgeous in what it is. So it could be something that, I mean, I was thinking, like, I have a piece of volcanic glass sitting here, and it's just gorgeous. It has this real beauty to the dark and the opaqueness of it, so, or it could be something that you take some time and create. Like, you can find a stone, you can paint it, and that you sort of imbue it with your creative powers when you do that. But in any case, I think it needs to be something that you are attracted to, that you think is really just beautiful in a way, just to really enliven that 5th house of Taurus there.
Yes. And something that might be very personally connected to the risks that you've taken in this past 18 months. Maybe you had a baby, maybe you've got that baby's little bracelet from the hospital. Maybe that could be the talisman. Or yeah, something art related, if you've started some new creative project, or if you've fallen in love, something connected to that person, whatever it is. I love that idea of carrying a talisman to really, really honor yourself for the change you've gone through. So
Yeah.
all right, we're going to move on now to those of you with Aquarius rising.
So the Aquarius rising, this lunar eclipse is falling in your fourth house. Fourth house is the house of home, so your family of origin, your ancestry, the land you live on, and your physical, tangible house, the roof over your head. And so with Taurus here, gosh, there is a big desire for stability at the very roots of your being. There's a big need for things to feel stable, to feel a sense of equilibrium here. So that's a big topic. And, and the thing is for these past couple years, there's not been a whole lot stable about this area of your life. I mean, maybe you've moved, or maybe you've learned something new about your personality in that time, because it can be the roots of your personality. Or maybe you've uncovered something totally different about your lineage, or found out something about your family of origin. Or in any case, there has been some dramatic change at this level in your life with Aquarius rising. And I'm pretty sure if you're listening, you know what it is, because there's something that feels really, really different about the way you put your feet on the ground. So the question for you is, what is your new stability here? What have you learned that can allow you to feel stable even through the biggest change? I mean, that's really been the lesson, especially in the fourth house. I keep thinking of this idea of like, it's almost like an earthquake has broken up, this like foundation that you had. And now there's like, plants growing up through all the cracks in the pavement. And you're like, whoa, like this is not what it used to be, but it's allowing you to embrace something really new about what stability means to you. And that piece of information is completely invaluable and is going to serve you from here on. I mean, this is a very important piece of learning. So I think those are some of the themes of the lunar eclipse. If you feel destabilized here, like just look at the learning that's available. It's possible too during Scorpio season, there's something that is coming at you from your profession that's helping you understand too. There's a tight link between your home and your profession. And astrology helps us see that through this polarity, through the 5th and the 10th house axis. So that's kind of what's got your attention at the moment.
It's so interesting having that need for stability in the home area, and then Uranus, and the thing that I just keep thinking of is a new understanding of your lineage. I think that's such a, with the DNA testing that everybody does these days, people are going through so much around understanding and learning things that they never knew about their lineage. And, your story could have something to do with that, or it could be many different things. Like you said, Jennie, it might be about moving. It might be you discovered that there's a problem in the structure of the house you actually live in. It could be as concrete an example as that. But over this last 18 months, you've done some interesting work in that area of figuring out a new normal, figuring out a new way of, when you were talking about wanting stability, and then all of a sudden cracks in the foundation and plants growing up, I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's in those plants that you're going to find the new stability.
Exactly.
It's finding the stable point within instability. And at this point in time, it's really important. You've been through this 18-month process of working hard on developing a new understanding of stability. And now the whole attention is going to shift with the nodal axis shifting. And the eclipses won't be in these two houses for you anymore. So at this point, what you want to do is really celebrate the change, celebrate where you're at now, how you have developed maybe an appreciation for those plants that are now growing out of the cracks. You you may all of a sudden realize, oh, wow, they're beautiful. Who knows? But the thing that we want to think about here as well, that we've been talking about, is having a tangible thing, a talisman of some sort to hold with you at this ending of this polarity of the eclipses, to have something to hold on to honor yourself for the work you've done in this area. So, what would you use for a talisman to honor the work you've done around restabilizing that area? What would you use? I just have to tell you, the first thing that comes to my mind, because it's just kind of funny, is a piece of that broken foundation.
Yeah. No, that's a good example, or just even like a little jagged rock is a symbol of that, right? Like of a symbol of more natural stone, like concrete, man-made being broken up, and natural stone taking your attention, But it's funny because when you're talking about it, it's like what came to my mind is, I remember being a kid, and I don't remember how old I was, but I remember finding this key, and it was an old-fashioned key. It had like loops in the little piece, and then it had the teeth and the big thing that goes in the lock. I don't know the terms for all those things, and I was so excited about that key. Like, I remember it being in my little collection of rocks and stuff. And I thought, it's like, that's actually the perfect thing, because it's like the key of your house, but also you're just this foundation, and you have the key to unlocking, understanding where you're going to be stable from now on, like that you're going to be unshakable in a new way, despite all sorts of things changing around you. So it's like the key to you moving forwards. But anyway, that's what I thought of.
That's awesome.
Something like that.
I like that.
Tell us, drop us a note if you pick up and do something like that.
Yeah, drop us a note. So we would love to hear what you use for a talisman and how this experience is for you. So moving on to folks with Pisces rising. Oh, is this my turn to start? Sorry about that. So, okay, if you've got Pisces rising, this puts this Taurus full moon eclipse into your third house. So the third house is really, I think of the third house first and foremost at this point. I think the third house is how you use your voice, whether that be your speaking voice, your written voice, your communication. It is so much about how you speak, how you process information and put it out into the world. There are other things that we think of with the third house, such as siblings, neighbors, the relationships that we don't necessarily, that we don't choose, but are kind of foisted upon us. The person checking us out at the grocery store, the neighbors that live downstairs, those and siblings are all part of the third house, as are, kind of just the day-to-day environment that we live in is also third house. So at any rate, that area, if you've got Pisces rising, you really, you probably grew up in the world with this attitude and this idea that this area was very stable. Maybe you, obviously, depending on your own chart, there could be things that change it a lot. But as a generalization, with Pisces rising, your relationships with your siblings, with your neighbors, with your immediate environment is all an area that you wanted and expected to be stable and solid and trustworthy, to stay that way. In 2018, when Uranus moved in there was suddenly a wake-up call of, oh, there might not be so much stability here. And, so that process has been going on for a while. But then 18 months ago, when the nodes moved into these two houses, your third and your ninth, there's really been a period of time, this 18 months, that you've done a lot of changing. You've done a lot of work to discover and develop a new idea of what stable means in this area, a new way of yeah, a new stability, a new story here. So what have you been through? You know, that's what you want to really think about is what's different about how I use my voice? What's different about how I use my voice in these particular relationships or in this particular area of my life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was thinking, you know, too, with Pisces rising, it's interesting, like Pisces rising and then the 3rd and the 9th house here. It's like, this is a lot about the way you think. You know, see your thought processes. And the 3rd house is this more simple earlier on, how you learn, you know, your cognition, you know, and then as you grow up, the 9th house becomes more like, and how does that develop into like a worldview and a more like wisdom and the wisdom of lived experience, you know, and it really brings in those 2 topics. And so there's something about, like just some big change and the way you think about things. Like what is so different about the way you think about things now compared to how it was? I mean, that's really what that is. And then I also think there's so much about so if we're talking about the mind and mental thinking and so on, there's also this key piece that where you put your mind, your energy follows, you know. So this is a wonderful opportunity to really mentally gain a picture of what stability means to you, and then and let that really fill your mind, and then it just kind of has this cascade effect that helps you feel more grounded overall. So there's something about that, something to do with your thinking processes and some way of visualizing what your new way of being stable is, and then letting that support you and guide you and help you. I mean, this is really interesting to think about it in those terms.
Yeah, I'd be so curious. I hope people with Pisces rising leave us a note, because I would be so curious just what has the change been in how you think, how you speak, how you engage in that kind of immediate environment with those immediate people in your life, and how, you know, these big, intense worldview ideas with Scorpio in the 9th house, how that impacts the change of tone in your voice and with your words, and, you know, how you are learning, how you have learned over this last 18 months to bring more stability to that area.
Yeah. And then during Scorpio season, how's the bigger picture going? You know, like, is there a way that you can feel or you are transformative in your viewpoint or your worldview, or that you feel empowered, you know, through your worldview, you know? And I think the other end of that is like, or are you suspicious of everybody around you, you know, and kind of having this opportunity to kind of investigate like what has shifted. You know, maybe you used to feel more suspicious, now you feel more empowered, or maybe it's the other way around, you know. But this is a really important time at the lunar eclipse to kind of evaluate for yourself, how do you feel, you know, and it depends on your own chart as well. But
what conspiracy theories have you swallowed?
Right. I mean, there is some there. It's funny because it has come up with the Pisces rising a couple times. But I mean, that 3rd and 9th axis, it is about your mindset and your worldview and how those interrelate, you know. And so this is a wonderful time to be curious about your own processes, you know, and take a look at them and, you know, poke at them a little bit and investigate and ask yourself, why do I believe what do I believe? And so on and so forth, you know. And meantime, we've been talking about this idea of like, well, how can you have a talisman that you can have in your pocket to help remind you of this process? I mean, especially with this one, because it's so much mental space. Like, you want something concrete, and we've been talking about a stone or a key or some sort of object, or a, you know, ring or something that has meaning to you that you can literally put in your pocket and you can touch when you feel like, whoa, wait a minute, I need a reminder. Like, I've been through a lot of change, and how can I celebrate that? In the 3rd house, gosh, what do you think? Could be a bunch of things. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
A favorite pen for like communicating, or I don't know, you know, a stone is always helpful. You can always imbue any stone, or, you know, really anything, especially a natural product like a stone, a natural thing of the earth, which is so good for Taurus, but you can imbue it with just an understanding of how far you've come, how you've developed your ability to bring these intense ideas that you have into the ability to speak clearly and find that stability of understanding your own voice. You've changed a lot there.
Yeah, you know what I thought of again. Say I pass it off to you so I can think. But what I thought it was a bookmark. I have a favorite treasured bookmark, and and every time you sit down to read, it's like you open up the book and there's that bookmark, and I like that because it really kind of symbolizes the thought processes, yet it's something tangible, and it marks your place and where you are in that book, which is really helpful for sort of picking up where your cognitive processes left off, and then you pick it back up. So anyway, that's what popped in my mind.
That's great. That's great. Well, I hope, those of you with Pisces rising, if you're still listening to us, leave us a note. Tell us what you're using for a talisman. Tell us, what's been the change in how you use your voice or how you interact in these particular ways with the people in your day-to-day life. And I think we are finished with this conversation. And this has been great, Jennie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
I can figure out how to stop this.